A successful businesswoman sits quietly at a riverside prayer gathering outside the city walls, and the moment a traveling preacher named Paul opens his mouth, her whole heart opens with it. This is Saint Lydia of Thyatira, remembered by the Church on August 3rd. She lived in the 1st century, and no record of her birth or death survives, because her veneration was never built on a formal canonization, it grew straight out of apostolic memory and ancient devotion. Lydia came from Thyatira, a city in Asia Minor known for its textiles and dyes, but by the time we meet her in the Acts of the Apostles, she had settled in Philippi, a Roman colony in Macedonia, where she dealt in purple cloth, a trade that points to real independence and a household large enough to receive guests. Scripture already calls her a worshipper of God, the term used for Gentiles drawn toward Judaism, when she went to listen to Paul at a place of prayer by the river. The Lord opened her heart to embrace the gospel, and she was baptized along with her entire household. Her own recorded words still ring with hospitality, "If you have judged me faithful to the Lord, come and stay at my house." After Paul and Silas were released from prison, it was to Lydia's home they returned, finding the believers gathered there, proof that her house had already become a gathering place for the newborn church. She's traditionally invoked by dye workers and cloth merchants, and her life teaches something simple and searching, that faith often begins the moment we stop talking long enough to truly listen. Decades after Lydia opened her home in Philippi, on the other side of the Mediterranean, a very different kind of founding story was taking shape in Naples. This is Saint Aspren of Naples, honored by the Church on August 3rd as the city's first bishop. He likely lived between the end of the 1st century and the beginning of the 2nd, though neither his birth nor his death can be dated with precision, and like Lydia, his cult goes back long before any formal canonization process existed. What we know most securely is his place at the head of Naples' ancient list of bishops. The marble calendar of Naples, from the mid-9th century, already records his burial on August 3rd, and the old local Liber Pontificalis praises his love for the poor and his care for anyone who came to him. A tradition written down only in the 9th century adds that Saint Peter himself, passing through on his way to Rome, healed Aspren of an illness, instructed him in the faith, baptized him, and consecrated him bishop, a cherished part of Naples' Catholic identity, even though it can't be treated as a contemporaneously documented fact. Later tradition also credits him with founding the Church of San Pietro ad Arum and an oratory dedicated to Our Lady. He's remembered as one of Naples' historic patrons, invoked there for centuries against headaches, and his life teaches that some of the Church's deepest roots grow from memory kept faithfully alive, generation after generation, long before anyone writes it down. Centuries later, as Roman authority in the West was falling apart piece by piece, a bishop in Gaul spent his life quietly holding scattered churches together. The Church also celebrates today Saint Euphronius of Autun, a priest, bishop, and confessor of the 5th century, already serving as Bishop of Autun by around 451 and who died sometime after 472. While still a priest, Euphronius had a basilica built over the tomb of the martyr Symphorian, a project that would grow into one of Autun's most important monastic centers. As bishop, he appears again and again in the surviving record of his age. A letter from 453 addressed to Thalassius of Angers, mentions in the Chronicle of Hydatius, and references in the letters of Sidonius Apollinaris. Around 470, Euphronius joined other bishops in choosing a new pastor for Chalon-sur-Saône, and Sidonius specifically praised how he ran that election without bribery or aristocratic favoritism. In 472, he was invited to help ordain the new bishop of Bourges. Gregory of Tours preserved one more concrete gesture. When Bishop Perpetuus of Tours was building a new basilica for Saint Martin, Euphronius sent marble to honor the saint's tomb. Together these records show a pastor woven into a real network of communion between churches, devoted to honoring the martyrs and to the integrity of his office. He has no universal patronage recorded, and his life teaches that faithfulness is often less about grand gestures and more about consistently showing up for the whole church, not just your own corner of it. In that same unsettled century, far from any bishop's palace, another kind of holiness was being forged in complete solitude, and with a chain. This is Saint Martin of Monte Massico, a hermit and recluse in 6th century Campania, not to be confused with Saint Martin of Tours. His birth is unknown, and tradition places his death only loosely around 580. Our main source is Pope Saint Gregory the Great, who devotes part of Book 3 of his dialogues to Martin, saying he heard the details from people who had known him personally, as well as from Pope Pelagius II. Martin settled into a narrow cave on Monte Massico, north of what is now Mondragone, and spent years there in prayer, fasting, and solitude. At one point, the account says, he chained his own foot to the rock to keep himself from giving in to the temptation of leaving his cell. When Saint Benedict heard about it, he sent Martin a pointed message: if he was truly a servant of God, he should be held in place by the chain of Christ, not by iron. Martin accepted the correction and removed the chain, a small detail that gives his extreme discipline a necessary balance of freedom and obedience. Gregory's account also describes a period without water and a threatening serpent near the cave, episodes that belong to the hagiographic memory of the time rather than to any modern verification. Archaeologists have since found medieval structures and paintings inside that same cave, evidence of how long the site was venerated. Martin has no universal patronage, but his life teaches that even the most fervent self-denial still needs the humility to accept correction from someone who can see us more clearly than we see ourselves. Half a millennium later, monastic life would again produce a bishop, this time in the middle of one of the Church's fiercest reform battles. This is Saint Peter of Anagni, a Benedictine monk who became bishop and a promoter of church reform, and who died in Anagni on August 3, 1105. A document attributed to Pope Paschal II, dated a few years after his death, formally ordered his cult and set his feast on August 3, a medieval form of canonization. Historians still debate the document's exact authenticity, but Peter's veneration as a saint is ancient and recognized by the martyrology regardless. Formed in monastic life, likely in the area of Salerno and Montecassino, he was raised to the see of Anagni during the Gregorian Reform, precisely when the papacy was fighting simony and political interference in church appointments. His diocese was small but strategically placed near Rome. Peter stood by Pope Gregory VII and his successors through the long conflict with the emperor and the antipope Clement III, and Pope Urban II lodged in Anagni more than once during Peter's time as bishop. His most tangible legacy was finishing the reconstruction of the cathedral, creating spaces there for prayer, study, and hospitality. Later, less certain accounts add a diplomatic mission to Constantinople and even a role in the First Crusade, but that text was written centuries afterward and can't be treated as established fact. What remains solid is a monk who became a builder, of stone and of communion. He's honored locally as a patron of Anagni, and his life teaches that reform of the Church rarely happens through slogans, it happens through people who simply keep building, brick by brick, exactly where they've been placed. 2 centuries after Peter of Anagni, another monk turned bishop would face down royal power directly, this time in medieval Croatia. This is Blessed Augustine Kazadic, a Dominican friar, theologian, and bishop of Zagreb and later Lucera, born around 1260 in Trogir, on the Dalmatian coast, and who died in Lucera on August 3, 1323. Pope Clement XI confirmed his cult in 1702, a recognition equivalent to beatification, and his cause for full canonization remains open to this day. Augustine entered the Dominican order in Split, studied in Paris, and worked alongside a fellow friar who would later become Pope Benedict XI, the same pope who named him Bishop of Zagreb in 1303, a region then torn by dynastic disputes. As bishop, he visited every corner of his diocese, pushed for better formation of the clergy, reformed local liturgical customs, and founded a school beside the cathedral, all while personally overseeing care for the sick and the poor with much of his own episcopal income. In 1318, during a mission to Avignon, he openly denounced the abuses of King Charles Robert, and the king's hostility afterward made it difficult for Augustine to even return home. Pope John XXII eventually transferred him to Lucera, in southern Italy, where he spent his final year serving the needy of a church still recovering from political and religious turmoil. He's venerated today in Zagreb, Trogir, Lucera, and throughout the Dominican order, and his life teaches that real pastoral charity sometimes requires the courage to tell even a king exactly what he doesn't want to hear. 6 centuries later, in 20th-century Spain, the story turns to a parish priest hunted simply for who he was. This is Blessed Salvador Fernández Segui, a diocesan priest and martyr, born in Lorca, in the province of Alicante, on May 25, 1880, and killed on the Carretera del Virgil, in that same province, on August 3, 1936. Pope St. John Paul II beatified him on March 11, 2001, together with José Aparicio Sanz and 232 companions, and it was his martyrdom, not any reported miracle, that grounded the beatification. Salvador studied at the Seminary of Valencia, was ordained a priest in 1904, and served the parishes of Villalonga and La Alcuria de la Comtesa before becoming, from 1924 onward, the pastor of the Santissima Cruz Church in Pedregar. He used his own resources to restore that church building and was remembered by his diocese for his close attention to the poor, the sick, the elderly, and children in his care. When the Spanish Civil War broke out in July 1936, churches came under attack and priests were hunted simply for their identity. Salvador had to abandon his parish and look for shelter, but he was captured and killed on that stretch of road on August 3. The Church concluded that hatred of the Catholic faith and priesthood was the real cause of his death, which is why he's venerated as a martyr. He has no formally proclaimed patronage, and his life teaches that a whole lifetime of quiet, faithful service can still be crowned, without warning, by the ultimate test of fidelity. Just days into that same wave of violence, a Franciscan formator would be discovered hiding not far from where Salvador had served. This is Blessed Alfonso López López, a priest of the conventual Franciscans, a formator of young religious, and a martyr, born in Secaran, in the province of Huesca, on November 16, 1878, and killed in Samalas between the night of August 3 and the early morning of August 4, 1936. Baptized Federico, he took the name Alfonso when he entered religious life at the Granolers convent in 1906, later completing his novitiate in Italy and being ordained a priest in 1911. For several years he served as a confessor at the Basilica of the Holy House of Loreto before returning to Spain to dedicate himself to forming young postulants and novices, among them a young man named Miguel Ramón Salvador, who would later share both his hiding place and his death. When the Civil War broke out, the Granolers convent was burned and the friars scattered. Alfonso took refuge in the homes of friends, but was eventually found and arrested alongside Miguel. The Church's own account of the beatification states plainly that these friars openly professed their faith under persecution and were killed out of hatred for God and the Church. Franciscan tradition holds that Alfonso refused every pressure to renounce his faith and died forgiving those who killed him, though the exact words attributed to him were only recorded well after the fact. He has no universal patronage, but stands as a model for formators everywhere, and his life teaches that what we pass on to the next generation can outlast even the worst violence meant to erase it. Captured alongside Alfonso that very night was the young brother he himself had trained. This is Blessed Miguel Ramón Salvador, a lay brother of the conventual Franciscans and a martyr, born in Caude, in the province of Teruel, on September 17, 1907. Baptized Eugenio, he took the name Miguel upon entering religious life at the Granolers convent in 1927, making his novitiate under Alfonso's own guidance, his temporary vows in 1928 and his solemn profession in 1933. As a lay brother, Miguel served in the ordinary tasks of community life, especially the kitchen and support for the seminary, and was remembered by his brothers for his quiet serenity and constant availability to help. He spent about 2 years in Italy connected to the shrine of Loreto before returning to Granolers in the mid-1930s. When persecution reached the convent and it was burned, Miguel stayed in hiding together with the mentor who had formed him, rather than seeking safety on his own. The two were discovered together, arrested together, and taken together to Samalas. The Church's account of their beatification recognizes that they died because they refused to hide their Catholic faith at a moment of open hatred toward the Church. Miguel has no formal patronage of his own, and his life teaches that some of the deepest fidelity in the gospel is shown not in dramatic public gestures, but in the quiet decision to stay beside the person who taught you how to be faithful in the first place. And on that same terrible night, across the region in Barcelona, one more priest chose not to hide at all. We close today's journey with Blessed Francisco Bondras Sanchez, a Salesian priest, educator, and martyr, born in Hecho, in the province of Huesca, on April 24, 1896, and killed in Barcelona on the night of August 3, 1936. He entered the Salesians, was ordained a priest, and by 1936 was serving as director of the Salesian schools of Sarria, an institution dedicated to educating young people and teaching them a trade. When the Civil War forced the community out, Francisco took refuge in his sister's home and even considered leaving the country, but couldn't secure a passport in time. On the night of August 3, armed militiamen arrived looking specifically for the school's administrator. According to the account preserved by the Salesian cause, Francisco stepped forward and said simply, "I am the director," not a rehearsed line, but a decision in the moment to claim responsibility so someone else wouldn't be taken in his place. He was arrested, taken to a building then used as the headquarters of a revolutionary group, and killed there. The final details of his death were never fully documented. The Church recognized his death as a true martyrdom, rooted in hatred for the faith he represented. And with that, we close today's 10 Saints of August 3. If any of these lives moved you, follow Saint of the Day, comment asking one of these saints to intercede for someone you love, and share this video with anyone who might need to hear this message today. Every share like that is truly a small act of evangelization. And remember, the full prayer to each of these saints is waiting for you right here in the video description.